En este video vamos a hablar de las palabras que se usan para comparación, mayor versus más grande. Hola a todos y bienvenidos. Welcome back. I'm Andrew Barr, founder of Real Fast Spanish. In this video, I'm going to answer a recent question that a student sent me. I sometimes get confused by más grande and mayor. For example, Estados Unidos es el país más grande de las Américas, o Estados Unidos es el mayor país de las Américas. Now, part of the challenge with mayor versus más grande is that they can both be the translation of the English words larger, bigger, greater, and higher. It is similar to our video on ya versus todavía, which I'll link to below, where either ya or todavía could be one of already or still, depending on the scenario. So for mayor versus más grande, rather than assign an English word for each, it's best to consider different scenarios. The 4 scenarios we're going to consider are the size of people, the age of people, the size of things, the age of things. Now I'm going to assign one of mayor or más grande to each of these categories, and there's going to be some overlap. So I'm going to represent the options on a Venn diagram because that simplifies things, at least for me. I also need to say that similar to many topics that we cover here on YouTube or on our blog or in our courses and live classes at Real Fast Spanish, you may find exceptions to these rules and examples. Part of the challenge of teaching a language is that rules can be broken. And sometimes it's best to consider what I'm talking about, or one of the teachers in our Spanish school, what they're talking about, as a common pattern as opposed to a strict rule that can never be broken. All right, so with that said, the first situation we're going to talk about today is the size of people. Here we should try to exclusively use más grande. So for example, my brother is bigger than I am. This in Spanish is mi hermano es más grande que yo. Mi hermano es más grande que yo. Here we're talking about physical size. So it could be muscles, or it could be that my brother is a little bit overweight, or it could be that he is taller than me. Now, just keep in mind that since más grande isn't specific, then we may need other Spanish adjectives to make it clear, like alto, gordo, or más fuerte. Next example, instead of comparing one person to another, we can just say that someone is the biggest in a group. So for example, Juan is the biggest guy in the gym. This in Spanish would be Juan es el más grande del gimnasio. Juan es el más grande del gimnasio. The next situation is the age of people. Here we should try to exclusively use mayor. So for example, my sister is older than I am. This in Spanish is mi hermana es mayor que yo. Mi hermana es mayor que yo. We can also refer to older people, the elderly in English, as simply los mayores. Los mayores in Spanish. Another example, in the context of, say, a children's story where imagine the main character is a child and at some point they want to prove themselves and make a proclamation. You know, I am grown up now, right? This is such a common plot in, like, say, children's books. So in Spanish, the child might want to say something like, Mama, I can help you. I am grown up now. This in Spanish would be, Mamá, puedo ayudarte. Ya soy mayor. Mamá, puedo ayudarte. Ya soy mayor.
Mamá, ¿puedo ayudarte? Ya soy mayor.
So as you can see, when it comes to comparing people, the role of mayor and más grande is really well defined. Next, we have the size of things. Now, in contrast to people, when we're talking about things, mayor and más grande are actually interchangeable, and both can mean one of the English options we spoke about earlier, bigger, larger, higher, and greater. Now, this is where mayor can get confusing because with people, it means age, but with things, it generally means size. So for our students' question today, Estados Unidos es el país más grande de las Américas, or Estados Unidos es el mayor país de las Américas, both options are completely acceptable in Spanish and are often swapped for one another. While researching this video, I found a Spanish article talking about the largest countries in the world, and we can see Rusia es el país más grande del mundo, Canadá es el segundo país más grande del mundo, Brasil es el mayor país de Sudamérica, Australia es el mayor país de Oceanía. So within this one article, the writer has flipped back and forth between these two options several times. Now, before moving on, I am going to make one recommendation here. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not a rule, but a pattern. This is something that I have observed. When referring to the size of objects, we can use both mayor and más grande, but if we're talking about an object that is physically larger, the preference is going to be más grande. And if we're talking about something that is bigger in other ways, the preference is mayor. If we're talking about the storage capacity, for example, of a smartphone, then the preference is going to be mayor. I found a video where a Spanish native was talking about the capacity of a memory chip, and she said that she preferred one because it has a larger capacity, larger memory. This in Spanish would be porque tiene mayor capacidad, mayor memoria. And in this case, it was a native from Spain, so she said porque tiene mayor capacidad, mayor memoria.
Primero, porque tiene mayor capacidad, mayor memoria y por lo tanto.
Another really good example of mayor referring to the size of something that is not physically bigger is in phrases like most of the time, most of the work, most of the effort, etc. So most of in Spanish is going to be la mayor parte. And some students will notice how close this is to the word mayoría, which means majority. And of course, these two words are closely related. So let's see an example. He is busy most of the time. This in Spanish would be está ocupado la mayor parte del tiempo. Está ocupado la mayor parte del tiempo. The next scenario we have to consider is the age of things. When we want to talk about the age of things, we are now constrained in Spanish in a really interesting way. If we want to say that, say, for example, Seville is an older city than Madrid, and we end up saying Sevilla es una mayor ciudad que Madrid, even though we use mayor with age when we're talking about people, this sentence actually means Seville is bigger than Madrid, or is a bigger city than Madrid. So we need another option. Instead, we need to use más antiguo in the case where we're talking about the age of things. So this example now becomes Sevilla es una ciudad más antigua que Madrid. Sevilla es una ciudad más antigua que Madrid. Now at this stage, a few students might be asking, is it okay to use más viejo for older instead of más antiguo? And I would strongly recommend that you avoid this. Again, this is not a rule, but a strong pattern, like a 20-to-1 pattern. And that is that más antiguo is going to be the preferred option, basically 20 out of 21 times. So as you can see, trying to find a Spanish word that's a good match for the English words like older, bigger, and larger will cause problems. Best to think about the Venn diagram and the 4 scenarios that we discussed today. Also, as I mentioned earlier, another really good example of this is ya versus todavía, where we need to think in scenarios rather than a simple direct translation from English. Check out that video here.